Chapter 15. As he descended the stone steps, Eorn heard the muffled echo of the celebration still going on in the main hall. His shadow stretched long under the dim torchlight, and the weight of the night settled over his shoulders like an old damp cloak. That's when he saw her, sitting on one of the steps nearly hidden in the gloom and silence. Arianwen held a small glass vial in her hands, as if it were a fragile secret she dared not reveal. It surprised him to find her so far removed from everything, especially when she was supposed to be the guest of honor. "What are you doing here?" he asked softly, almost reverently, before taking a seat beside her. Arianwen didn't lift her eyes from the vial. "Do you think it will work?" she whispered. Eorn didn't need her to say more. Caelaith's spell, the faint hope they both shared, a longing older than the earth itself. Now that he knew who Arianwen's betrothed was, he understood her disillusionment without needing to ask. "I saw you dancing with him," he murmured. "Just a little while ago." She turned to look at him. Her green eyes, usually alive like a forest glade after rain, were dulled, as if veiled by an unseen mist. "And what did you think?" "That you danced like you were floating, and you were beautiful." A faint smile curved Arianwen's lips, and something stirred in Eorn's chest, as if his heart had suddenly remembered it could still beat. "I meant him. Fiacre Macabre," she clarified. "Ah. Well," Eorn pretended to consider, "I thought he was a bit short." Arianwen let out a brief laugh, like a chime breaking the silence, and nudged him gently with her shoulder. The gesture was light, but it carried all the intimacy in the world. "Do you remember that story you read in Caelaith's cabin?" he asked. "The legend of Tir na Nog," she murmured, a glimmer of light returning to her gaze. "Yes. That place beyond time where pain doesn't exist. Where everything is eternal and pure." He looked at her intensely. "You and I could go there. Find that hidden place between worlds. You and I." "You and I," Eorn repeated, with a fire rising from deep within him. "Or will you tell me you've never dreamed of running away?" Arianwen didn't answer right away. She lowered her gaze, swallowed hard. Then she looked at him with quiet honesty. "Right now, yes. I'd leave without a second thought. But you? Weren't you glad to see them again? Your family, your roots?" "Yes, of course. My brother is alive. He's well. But I don't feel like one of them anymore." He ran his hands over his face, tense. "It's like after I left they learned to live without me. Like the hole I left was filled by new kinds of love, new versions of themselves where I don't exist. Did you expect the world to stop in your absence?" "No, but it would hurt less if it weren't so obvious they don't need me." Arianwen looked at him with both tenderness and resolve. "You made the choice to leave, Eorn. They just learned to survive. And now that you've come back, they don't need a wounded ghost. They need you to truly return." Eorn nodded silently. But his eyes searched hers with a quiet plea. "Then, you won't come with me to Tir na Nog?" She sighed. Her voice was a thread, soft as mist over the moors. "You are a man of honor. And I, a daughter of my lineage. We can't run away. No matter how much we wish we could. You are my Anamkara, my sole companion," he whispered so close his breath brushed her lips. "If you asked me, I'd give it all up for you." "If you do that," she breathed, trembling at his nearness, "you'll sign your own sentence. Neither Fiacre nor my father would ever allow it." "It wouldn't be the first time I've cheated death." In his chest something beat like a war drum. Caelan, perched on the ramparts, turned his head in their direction. As if sensing that his rider's soul burned at the edge of an impossible choice. Arianwen closed her eyes. Everything faded, the vows, the family ties, the sorrow of the world. Only they remained, and the desire and the space between their lips. "Eorn." The voice struck like lightning. A figure stood on the stairs, a sleeping child in her arms. It was Rhiannon. Arianwen pulled away, as if the spell had been broken. She stood quickly. Aeon turned, visibly shaken. "What is it?" His voice was harsh, harsher than he intended. Arianwen felt the shift, the difference between the way he spoke to her and how he spoke to Rhiannon. "I'm sorry to interrupt," said Rhiannon calmly. "I just wanted to make sure you were all right." Aeon rose too, his face hardening. "I'm as all right as someone can be, after coming back from the other side and finding the world moved on without him." Arianwen felt a sharp ache at his words. It wasn't fair. And yet, Rhiannon didn't flinch. "Then when you're done mourning yourself, we'll be in the hall," she said, and walked past him with quiet dignity. Once Rhiannon had gone, Arianwen turned to him. "Why do you speak to her like that?" "Don't you see? That woman is no longer the one I love. She's different. Stronger, more sure of herself, but she no longer sees me. As if I was never a part of her. Maybe she just grew up. Maybe she learned how to protect herself." "You're taking her side." "I'm taking the side of the truth. You can't blame her for changing when you were the one who left." Aeon lowered his head. Arianwen turned to go, but then paused. "Did you want to kiss me to hurt her? Or to escape from what you're feeling?" The question froze him. "No," he stammered. "It wasn't that." "Where were you coming from before you found me?" she pressed. "Didn't you just come from confronting them?" Arianwen shook her head, wounded. "I thought it meant something. But I was only your refuge." And she walked away with steady steps, though the tremble in her voice still lingered in the air. Aeon was left alone. Silence reclaimed the steps. Above, perched on a stone gargoyle, Caelan watched him with golden eyes. Like an ancient guardian who had seen too many centuries pass, and too many souls lost at the crossroads of their own fate. Chapter 16. While Arianwen and Aeon, cloaked in the dimness of the staircase, wove with their words a promise they had yet to name, a shadow stood motionless below, merged with the cold stone of the wall. Theocra Macabre hadn't left the hall by chance. He had been looking for her. Again. And again she had slipped through his fingers like water. Arianwen was not the obedient young woman her father had promised. There was a subtle fire in her, a hidden will beneath the folds of her voice. And Macabre had never been good at dealing with women who thought for themselves. But that wasn't what frayed his nerves now. It was the way she spoke with that outsider. With an inappropriate familiarity. With dangerous intensity. Aeon Macdara. The name seared his memory like a brand of red-hot iron. He heard just enough. One word, a whisper between them, was enough to poison his blood. He stepped away from the shadows with a pounding pulse, as if he had just witnessed a second humiliation. Because the first had yet to heal, the insult from the Macdara. Years ago he had offered them his hand, when Connell was searching for his missing sister. But when they finally found her among the MacDonnell, their gratitude turned to blame. The Laird MacDonnell killed Reed, his most trusted man, and instead of demanding justice, Connell was content with Macabre's death, claiming he had tried to force his sister. A version Macabre never accepted. There was no trial. No truth. Only the word of dear Mad MacDonnell. Only silence and scorn. And now another Macdara had returned from oblivion, from hell itself, to steal Arianwen from him too. That same night, under the cover of darkness, he rode to an inn lost between winding roads. He entered with his hood low over his eyes, and sat across from a man already waiting, shrouded in smoke and stale beer. The other didn't bother to feign respect. He drank like nothing mattered. "You failed me," Theocra said in a low voice, his jaw clenched. "I did what we agreed," Dragon replied without looking at him. "You're the one who miscalculated. I paid you to kidnap Lady Arianwen. You were supposed to return her to me, so I could rise as her savior. It was simple. You knew what was at stake." Dragon laughed bitterly. I knew you didn't care about that woman. You just wanted to make sure she was worth the trouble before binding yourself to her. If she was beautiful and docile, you'd pretend to have rescued her. If not, well, you wouldn't have lifted a finger to find her. I'm not a fool, Macabre.
But what I didn't know was that a hawk would fall from the sky and ruin everything.
He wasn't one of the Ocalia, said Fiacre, tense as a bowstring. Dragon looked up.
Then who was it?
Eoin Macdara. Dragon froze. The name struck him like a stone to the chest. Macdara. His voice had gone hard. The mug trembled in his hand. Do you know why I still take jobs like this? Why, despite being laird of the Mac Tuathal, I keep selling my sword for a handful of coins? Fiacre shook his head, though he did know. Or at least thought he did. Because Conall Macdara killed my Uncle William before King Bruce, in trial by combat. He didn't just leave us without a leader. Bruce punished us by sending our men to fight in Ireland. When I returned, I found the clan in ruins. Widows. Starving children. Broken men. And no one came to our aid. Because everyone believed Conall's version. They branded us as beasts. As traitors. Dragon leaned toward the table. His voice, once firm, now sounded like a contained lament, ancient and bitter.
That's why I sell my honor.
Why I carry the shame of being a laird, with no fertile land and no allied shields. Because Conall Macdara left us without a soul. Fiacre nodded silently. Not out of empathy, but because he understood that kind of hatred. He too had been stripped of everything. He too had been made invisible. And in Eoin Macdara, they both saw a reflection of what they couldn't forgive themselves for. Then listen closely, he said calmly. You and I aren't so different. We both want to see the stag's banner go up in flames. And we both know that sometimes justice needs desperate men. Dragon watched him without blinking.
What are you proposing?
A plan. One that won't fail this time. The laird of the Mac Tuathal motioned for more beer. Outside, the night whistled through the branches like a warning. And while they schemed in the dark miles away, a white hawk slept in the high branches of an ash tree, its head tucked beneath its wings. Caelan, silent guardian of the unseen, was not fully asleep. Chapter 17. The sword cut through the air like an ancient exhale, a steel lament piercing the dawn. Eoin spun and delivered a sharp strike, full of force, of muscle memory, of need. Sweat beaded on the bare skin of his chest and arms, mingling with the fresh breath of morning, as if the world itself were trying to soothe the fire pulsing through his muscles. He had been at it for an hour, lost in that solitary dance with steel. Every movement was a silent prayer, every step a return to something long forgotten. In his wandering life, in the lonely days beside Caelan, he had kept this ritual as one might guard a sacred flame. It was more than exercise, it was his anchor. And today more than ever, he needed to hold on to something that wouldn't slip through his hands. Since meeting Arianwen, he hadn't felt the urge to train. Her presence alone kept the chaos inside him at bay. But that morning he had woken before dawn, restless, his chest full of shadows begging to be released. Wielding the sword gave him a strange kind of peace, as if by exhausting his body he could quiet the turmoil in his soul. Caelan circled high above, its silhouette etched against the rising hues of the horizon. The hawk was more than a companion, it was his witness, his reflection, his winged shadow. In it he saw all that remained free within himself, all that still remembered how to fly. As he moved into a defensive stance, a voice pulled him from his focus.
Not bad for someone who vanished, said Conall, stepping into the clearing with sure footing.
Though that last spin, the blade should have been a little higher. Eoin drew a long breath, and slowly lowered his sword. He didn't reply at once. He looked at him, and for a moment there was no reproach in his eyes, only an old sorrow, as if he saw him through many lifetimes. Think you can do better? He asked at last, a spark of challenge in his voice. With my eyes closed, Conall replied, grinning with the boyish arrogance they still shared, the kind that had survived even their pain. Talon and Fiacre followed behind, chuckling quietly, bringing with them a lighter air. But something in Aeon's gaze remained distant, anchored elsewhere. He smiled, yes, but the smile was fleeting, more a reflex than a surrender. When they faced each other, blade against blade, the clash of metal wasn't just a spar between brothers, it was an ancient language, a clumsy attempt to speak where words failed. They moved with the precision of a dance, but it was their souls that truly fought. In one of the crossings they ended up face to face, breaths mingling, eyes locked. "Don't let me win," Aeon whispered, his voice rough.
"Not now."
"I never did out of weakness," Conall replied. "We were always equals."
"Then why?
Why always let me take the lead?" Conall lowered his guard slightly, just enough to be honest. "Because you were my brother. And seeing you happy meant more to me than any victory. I always wanted you to have everything." The steel trembled in Aeon's hands. He stepped back as if those words had pierced deeper than any blade. "Now I understand," he murmured, falling to his knees as though the weight of truth had finally claimed him. Conall rushed to his side, placing a hand on his shoulder, offering no judgment. Aeon's face, lit by the gentle light of dawn, showed an emotion that needed no name. It was memory. It was wound. It was revelation. "I remember everything now," he said at last.
"Not just the fights."
"I remember how you gave me the best cuts of meat, how you pretended not to care about gifts, and how with Rhiannon you stepped aside without me knowing. You gave me the heart that was yours." Conall lowered his gaze, defeated. "She was my first love. But you came along, and I didn't know how to stop what became your story." Aeon rose slowly. The air between them felt different, denser, more real. "You stepped aside without a fight. And I lived a lie."
"It wasn't out of cowardice," Conall replied. "It was love."
"For you. For her. I didn't know how to do it better." The silence between them was deep and long. Then, with a glint in his eyes, Aeon smiled the way he had as a child, the old dimple appearing at his cheek. "So Rhiannon called out my name in her sleep while lying beside you," he teased, and for the first time in a long while, laughter returned to his voice. Conall let out a dry, disbelieving laugh.
"Once, even while I was kissing her."
"I was a fool, but one who loves you more than he knows how to say." Aeon stepped forward and placed a firm hand on his shoulder.
"You're my brother."
"I know how to yield too. I've seen you too, Conall. You truly love each other. There's no place for me in that story, and that's all right. It's time I moved on." And then they embraced. Long. Tight. As if with that gesture they could restore not only the lost years, but the broken souls of them both. Fiach cleared his throat, his voice grounding them back to the earth. "Are we training again, or have you become bards now?" Talon elbowed him, and the brothers burst into laughter renewed. "Carry on without me," said Aeon.
"I have something more important to do." "What's that?" asked Conall.
"To ask forgiveness. From your wife. I've been cruel without reason since I arrived." "Is she in the garden?" "With our son most likely." "Then that's where I'm headed," Aeon said, a half smile on his lips. "May Caelan guide me." He walked away in silence, the hawk still circling above him like a suspended blessing. And as he moved forward, the sun rose fully, as if the world at last offered him a truce. Chapter 18. Something had shifted deep within him. As he descended in silence toward the gardens, wrapped in the fresh scent of dawn and the golden mist that hung over the sleeping flowers, Aeon felt a crack open in the wall of silence he had built inside himself. It wasn't just Conall's words or his revealed pain, it was something older, something that came from his own soul, a truth that had long waited to be acknowledged. Now, looking back, he realized it wasn't his heart that had bled, but his pride. What hurt wasn't the loss of a love that had never truly burned, but the wound of being replaced without understanding why. Rhiannon, the Rhiannon he had known, was quiet, gentle, shaped by his expectations. The Rhiannon he saw now was someone else, alive, radiant, transformed by a love that had awakened her. And in that revelation, there was both sorrow and relief. Because he knew without bitterness that what they had lived had been nothing more than a mirage, and that the truth, though woven in pain, had prevailed. The garden welcomed him with its ancient beauty, still as the song of Caelan, who circled high above the oaks. The hawk, free and watchful, seemed to mirror what he was only beginning to understand. His soul was finally opening to a new way of seeing. Just as his brother had said, he saw her sitting beneath the rising sun, on a lichen-covered stone bench beside little Eorn. The boy was fiercely guarding a tiny creature wrapped in his arms, and Rhiannon was trying gently, but unsuccessfully, to persuade him otherwise. "Good morning," he greeted, with a warmth he hadn't used in a long time. She looked up, surprised, as if she hadn't expected him. "Eorn, are you feeling better?" "I spoke with Connell. And yes, something's cleared," he replied with a faint smile, crouching to ruffle the dark hair of the child who giggled under his hand. "I'm very glad to hear that," she said, with a sincere glimmer in her eyes. Eorn looked at her directly, without shields. Then he took her hand, as if that gesture might finally close an old chapter. "Forgive me. For everything." Rhiannon nodded, her eyes glistening with moisture. "Forgive me too." They stood in silence for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper carried by the wind. "Was it real?" She took a deep breath, as if she could still smell that lost love. "It was a true dream," she answered softly. "And when we believed you dead, it became a nightmare." She touched his cheek just lightly, and in that gesture hung everything they had been, and everything they would never be. "I would have married you, Eorn Macdara. And it would have been a mistake," he finished. They both smiled, and in that smile the knots of a past that no longer bound them unraveled. The moment dissolved like mist in the sun when the little bundle in the child's arms stirred, and let out a soft mew. "What have you got there, Eorn?" the warrior asked, intrigued. "A lost kitten," Rhiannon replied. "We searched the garden but found no sign of its mother. And he won't let it go." "Seems you have a new companion now," Eorn joked, stepping closer to see the creature, a pearl with white fur barely bigger than his palm. "I'd rather not. We still have to travel to Tur in Oiha, and then back to Dun Ashlin. And Neela is waiting at home." "Neela. Our wolf," she explained casually. Eorn raised an eyebrow, remembering a bloody episode from childhood when a wolf had attacked him and Connell had saved his life. "You have a wolf?" "I found her as a pup. After that, I raised her myself. She's been with me ever since." "You're full of surprises, Rhiannon Macdara." "Macdara," she corrected sweetly. He chuckled and stroked the tiny animal. "So besides being a lady and a mother, you're also a rescuer of lost souls." "I try my best," she said with a smile full of life. But turning her eyes back to the child, she insisted. "The kitten can't come with us, love. Pearl will have to stay here." "Yes, she can." "Pearl loves me," the little one protested. Eorn took the kitten into his hands. She was so light, so fragile. And when she opened her eyes, the animal looked at him with two green orbs, almost human. So much like Arianwen's that a shiver of tenderness ran through him. "I have an idea," he said, a new light on his face. "Do you remember Lady Arianwen, Eorn?" The boy blinked, uncertain. "You played with her yesterday. You danced together." "Very pretty," the child declared with the certainty of someone who knows what he saw. Eorn held back a laugh. "She's a little sad, you know. Because we're leaving, and she's staying behind." "She come with us," he said, matter of fact. "I wish she could. But she has to marry an important knight," Eorn explained, and saying it brought a sting, as if the words hurt more than he wanted to admit. "How about we leave Pearl with her? So she won't feel so lonely." The boy looked thoughtful. His dark curls fell over his eyes as he mulled it over. Finally, he nodded solemnly. "Yes. So she's not sad." Eorn felt his chest fill with a tenderness he'd never known. "You are without a doubt your father's son," he said proudly and pulled him into a hug, pressing the small forehead to his chest. And as he looked up, he saw Caelan gliding silently above them, between the oaks and the sky. The hawk circled with the calm of one who watches over what is sacred. Eon understood then that he too had been lost, but perhaps not anymore. Perhaps he had begun to find his way home. Chapter 19. Arianwen woke up late. She had slept poorly. The bed was unfamiliar, and the room weighed heavy on her soul. That house was no home, and her return to Glorndunnock brought no comfort. Only her father still tied her to that place, and not for much longer. Soon she would leave as the wife of Maccaber, bound for foreign lands, surrounded by a clan that was not her own. And before the sun set, she would have to say goodbye to Eorn. The night before, during the betrothal feast, Rhiannon had whispered that they were leaving at once for Tir Nah Oiha. Conall wanted to announce his brother's return as soon as possible. Arianwen understood, the return of a lost son carried more weight than any wedding. But understanding it didn't make it hurt any less. When she had left her Aunt Bridget's house behind, she'd known her fate would no longer be hers. But she hadn't imagined that fate would place Eorn in her path, only to rip him away so mercilessly.
Not much left now, she thought, sitting up, her fingers searching beneath the pillow for Seoleth's little vial.
Feeling the cool glass, she let out a sigh. Perhaps only magic could help her bear the inevitable. Help her believe that Fiachra Maccaber could be her future. As she dressed, one of her ladies, Fianara, knocked gently at the door. "My lady, Eorn Macdara awaits you in the hall." It wasn't wise to be glad. But joy bloomed without her permission. She rushed to finish, without care or order, and descended the stairs barely touching them. At the threshold, she saw him. He wasn't looking at her, and for a few seconds she simply watched him in silence. How handsome he was, but there was more. Something had changed. When he finally looked up, he smiled. And Arianwen's knees nearly gave out. He had a dimple in his left cheek. How had she never noticed? Because he had never smiled at you like that, she answered herself. She stepped closer, drawn by some invisible force. "Eorn," she said softly. "You seem different." "Come sit," he replied, rising and pulling out a chair for her. "I have a surprise." On the table, a small white kitten played with a scrap of fabric. "Her name is Pearl. My nephew found her. We thought she might make a fine wedding gift." Arianwen stroked its fur, soft as mist, and the kitten looked up at her with pure green eyes. Her throat tightened. "She's beautiful," she whispered. "The best gift anyone's ever given me." Their eyes met. Arianwen held back tears. Eorn looked away with difficulty. They knew they were not alone. Servants passed through the hall, and some guests chatted in quiet groups. They were surrounded. And they would never be alone again. "Did you make peace with Conall and Rhiannon?" she asked, trying to escape the weight of her emotions. "Yes. You were right. I wasn't being fair to them. Or to you. I acted like a fool. I was hurt, and you didn't deserve to be treated like a second choice." His words pierced her. She was grateful for his honesty, but he had called her a second choice. Her heart ached at the truth of it. "When do you leave?" "As soon as everyone is ready." "And are you ready for what awaits you?" "Only my own ghosts remain, Arianwen. They're well. They don't need me anymore. But I have to learn to live with that." She squeezed his arm gently. "Then meet their joy. Let them embrace you, like Conall and Rhiannon did. I would give anything to see their faces when you walk in." He took her hand. "And I would give anything for you to walk with me to the end." "But you kept your promise." "You saved me, Arianwen. You gave me back my life. It's time you followed your own path." "But what path?" "The one her father had drawn. The one she could only follow, if she silenced her soul with a potion." She took the kitten into her arms and kissed its head. She didn't know how to hide the trembling in her soul. "So this is goodbye?" "I'm afraid so." The sadness in her eyes tore at him. Arianwen, you can still live adventures, even with him.
With who? Your husband.
You deserve to be happy. If he loves you, he won't dim the light you carry inside. And then she couldn't hold it anymore. The tears came without asking. She wanted to embrace him, to beg him to take her with him, to plead not to be left behind.
But she said nothing.
She clutched Pearl more tightly. The kitten meowed in protest. I should go before someone sees me like this, she murmured. She saw Fianna and Ain in a corner. One watched her with disdain, the other with pity. Servants moved about, watchful eyes everywhere. She knew anyone could bring word to her father, or to Fiacre. Don't be sad, said Aeon, kissing her hand with quiet tenderness. If Caerlaith's spell works, this will be nothing but a sweet memory.
This.
He turned away. His gaze changed. It burned. You and me, Arianwen. What might have been if I had no honor, and you had no duty. He winked at her and left. She watched him go. Perhaps it hadn't been only spite that led him to offer her escape. Perhaps he truly did love her. But he was leaving. And she remained bound. In just a few days, she would be the wife of Fiacre Macabre. Chapter 20. The March. By mid-morning, under a leaden sky that promised rain, the Macdara party departed from Glorndunnock. Arianwen did not come down to see them off. She remained in her chamber still, with her heart in her throat and her eyes fixed on the window. In the distance, Aeon's silhouette on horseback blurred into the mist of the road, as if the world itself refused to hold on to his figure. She would have given anything to go with him. But she didn't. Not this time. She stayed firm, even as she was breaking inside, determined not to keep pretending another day. That night she would drink Caerlaith's potion. Arianwen. Ain's trembling voice pulled her from her daze. She turned and saw her younger sister standing at the threshold, hesitant, hands clasped, eyes lowered. What is it? I just wanted to know if you're all right. The sincerity in those words surprised Arianwen. Why wouldn't I be? Ain swallowed before answering. Earlier in the hall, when you were speaking with Macdara, it looked like it hurt to watch him go. He's different. Was it that obvious? The question came out harsher than she meant. If Ain had noticed, surely others had too. And that shouldn't matter, not if she were truly promised to another. Just then, a servant knocked at the door. Her father required her presence. So did Fiacre Macabre. Before leaving, she turned to Ain, who was watching a small white kitten play with the folds of the rug. Can you do me a favor? Take care of Pearl while I'm gone. The girl's eyes lit up. I'll take care of her like she's mine. Arianwen nodded, moved. For her sister to step away, even for a moment from their mother's shadow to be with her, that was more than she had hoped for. The smile Ain gave her was faint but true. The announcement. In the great hall, Arianwen forced herself to smile. Her father and Fiacre were speaking as though the future was already written and sealed. You called for me, father? Fiacre's had an idea, impulsive but flattering. He wants to move the wedding forward. It will be next week. The world seemed to freeze. The words fell like stones. Aeon was gone. And she was going to marry someone else.
It was going to happen anyway, she said at last, her voice hollow. What does it matter, if it's sooner? That's not a very romantic answer, Lady Arianwen, said Fiacre with a tight smile.
His small, calculating eyes watched her too closely. He had seen something. Or heard something.
Is something wrong, daughter?
You should be happy. Arianwen lowered her gaze. What could she say? That her heart wasn't hers?
That she felt sold like cattle? That no one had ever asked her what she wanted?
I'm just tired. Too many emotions. If you'll allow me, I'd like to rest a moment. Of course, but do rest well. Tonight we'll discuss the plans. Fianna is thrilled, she's already imagining the banquet. She nodded and left before she could break. Once in her room, she shut the door with trembling hands. Ain came to her right away. Is everything all right?
Yes, just a bit of a headache.
Thank you for staying. But peace didn't come. Harsh knocking rang out, and Fianna burst in with her usual violence. What are you doing here, girl? And with that animal? I just wanted to. Come now. Fianna snarled, grabbing her by the arm. You need to try on the dresses. Your waist has thickened again. Arianwen wanted to step in, say something, anything. But Ain was already handing the kitten back, with a look that broke her heart. I'm sorry, Arianwen whispered. Once alone, she hugged the kitten to her chest. Aeon was gone. And maybe she'd never have her sister either. All she had left was hope. She took out the vial she'd kept hidden for days, and held it in her hands like a relic.
It has to work, she murmured.
She lay down on the bed, repeating it like a spell, as Pearl slept in her lap and Aeon's face hovered behind her closed eyes. Chapter 21. The Return. The walls of Ter Nahoya finally rose on the horizon, etched against a sky of low clouds and grey light. Aeon pulled the reins and brought his horse to a stop. He took a deep breath. The air smelled of wet peat, of heather, of home. Conall beside him also reined in.
What are you thinking about?
I wasn't thinking. Just feeling. Conall smiled. That was such a him answer, direct and unguarded. Unlike himself, Aeon had never been afraid to name what lived inside him. And what are you feeling? Fear. You? Impossible. There's nothing in there that could defeat you. Or is it Duran? That won't happen again, brother. We won't allow it. It's not that, Aeon replied, eyes fixed on the fortress. I know you won't let it happen. And that's exactly why it weighs more. I did allow it. I tried everything, Conall, but it wasn't enough. We were betrayed from within. You didn't fail. Even if you say that, it doesn't change how I feel. Shame doesn't listen to reason. I feel like a child about to face his father, even if that place to return to no longer exists. Conall didn't answer. The silence between them thickened, as if the names they couldn't speak hovered in the air, too heavy to be voiced. Sometimes dreams weigh more than reality, he said at last quietly. Maybe that's why we keep carrying them. Aeon lowered his gaze. He didn't want to talk about them. Not yet. But his sister's face came to him like an echo that hadn't quite faded. A warm memory. A whisper in another tongue. The feeling of laughter, of an afternoon by the fire. The carriage, which had been following at a distance, passed them with the creak of wheels over damp earth. Conall nudged his horse forward gently. Come on. We're almost there. And once you pass through those gates, you'll see that ghosts don't always wait on the other side. Sometimes they stay behind. Do you think? Aeon stopped. He wasn't sure what he was asking. If she would be there. If home still existed. If something lost could still be alive, even if only within him. I think some things don't disappear completely, Conall answered, as if he could read him from the inside out. Even if they change shape. Even if they hurt. Aeon didn't reply. The wind carried the scent of damp earth and heather, and for a moment he thought he heard voices that no longer existed, a soft laugh, the creak of a pipe, the murmur of a needle sliding through linen. He shook his head. The past couldn't keep pulling at him. Not now. He spurred his horse and caught up with his brother. In his chest, though, something ached with a tenderness he didn't know how to name. I just need to go back, he whispered. And maybe with that, remember how to live. He spurred his horse. But in his chest he found no comfort. Instead, an absence bit down hard. Arianwen. He wished she were beside him. In that moment of return, of vertigo, of coming back to all he'd once known. She would have looked at him with those green eyes of hers, her smile lit with life, and said, "Everything's going to be all right." That voice, imagined or remembered, pushed him forward. Conall had already ridden ahead. Eorn followed at a trot, the mist wrapping around his thoughts, his heart tied to two names, Alvia and Arianwen. And above them, somewhere in the sky, Caelan circled high as if guarding his soul's path from the air. Chapter 22. Just as he had predicted, Conall found the great hall of Caer Thalen buzzing with anticipation. The twins Conall and Eira were seated at the feet of Thalen mac Dara, who was telling them a story in a deep, steady voice. Eira, the youngest, was dozing in his lap. But when Conall's purposeful footsteps echoed through the hall, the girl opened her wide eyes, identical to her father's, and let out a shriek of joy.
"Dad!" the twins shouted in unison, springing up from the floor and running to meet him.
Conall crouched down, scooped them into the air, and spun in a circle, making them fly and drawing laughter from all three. "I'm so glad to see you, little monsters." Thalen mac Dara stood as well, approaching with little Eira in his arms. The girl reached out toward Conall with a funny little sound, eager to join the fun. "And you, sweetheart, still not saying a word?" asked Conall, setting the twins down and lifting Eira into his arms. "She's waiting to say guardian," joked Thalen with a paternal smile, resting a hand on his nephew's shoulder. "Though I'm betting her first word will be grandpa, even if I'm not one." Conall chuckled softly. "You wish." He paused a moment, taking in everyone around him. His chest swelled with joy. They were about to live through an emotional quake, but it had to be done. "Where's Diarmid?" he asked, realizing someone was missing, his most trusted man. King Bruce summoned him. "He's in Stirling attending to council matters," Thalen explained. "Why?" "Because I wish he were here too."
"But he'll find out."
"What I have to share can't wait." "By all the hells, Conall. What is this about?" thundered Tor as he strode into the hall with his booming voice and firm step. Conall offered him a candid smile. "This concerns you too, my friend. I'm glad you're here." "Don't scare me like that. What in the blazes is going on?" pressed Thalen, tense as a drawn bowstring. "Right. As you've seen, Rhiannon didn't come in with me. She's outside at the gates of Caer Thalen with someone." Everyone looked at him, puzzled. "I'm going to have them brought in."
"But first, Uncle Thalen, you should sit down."
"Sit down? Do you think my legs tremble like some worn-out old man's?" the man snapped, raising an eyebrow. "Just a precaution," Conall replied, holding back a grin.
"Tor, stand behind him just in case."
Thalen grumbled but didn't move. Conall turned to the door, signaled the guard, and the man disappeared for a few seconds. When he returned, he was followed by two figures. Behind them came Nara with little Eorn, and soldiers Fiach and Thalen closed the group. Thalen frowned. One of the newcomers looked exactly like Conall. Exactly. But Conall hadn't moved from his side.
"What sorcery is this?" he murmured.
"I know," said Conall.
"It seems impossible. But you had to see it with your own eyes."
"It's Eorn." Silence. Then disbelief crashed down on them like stone.
"Well, I'll be damned," whispered Tor.
He stared at the new Eorn with his mouth ajar, and took a step back as if he'd seen a ghost. Thalen said nothing. He stepped forward slowly. His usually stern face twisted with wonder and tightly held emotion. "Is it you?" he asked, voice low and cracked.
"It's me," said Eorn.
That was enough. Thalen dropped to his knees awkwardly, as if gravity had grown heavier. Eorn followed, kneeling too, and when Thalen embraced him, he did it with a force that threatened to break him. "Forgive me," Eorn whispered. "I couldn't protect them. Duran killed them, and I did nothing. I failed." "No," Thalen replied, holding him tighter. "Many died defending their own. They died with honor. Don't carry the fate of all on your shoulders. The walls of Caer Thalen burned, but not its spirit. That lives in you, and in the boy." Conall watched them in silence, holding back tears. Beside him the children stared wide-eyed. Little Eorn, freed from Nara's arms, ran to his namesake and wrapped his arms around his back. "Big Eorn," he shouted. The twins laughed, ran up to and joined the hug.
"What's happening?" asked Eorn, surrounded by warm little bodies and tiny clutching hands.
"These are my children," Conall explained. "Conall and Erin. And your namesake?" Eorn swallowed hard. The children looked at him like he was a legend. "Who told them about me?" Thalen smiled, standing back up. "Since the day they were born. I told them your stories. To them, you're a hero." Eorn ran a hand over his face to wipe away the tears. He wasn't used to feeling like this, flesh again among his own. "I need some air," he said suddenly, rising abruptly and walking out of the hall. The children watched him go, puzzled. Silence hung heavy for a moment.
"What's wrong with him?" asked Tor.
"Too much too fast," Conall replied. "It's shaken all of us," added Thalen, his voice deep.
"So what do we do?"
"Go after him?" asked Nara, anxious. "Leave him be," suggested Rhiannon.
"He just needs time."
Tor snorted and turned to the children.
"Let's go get some ale, little ones.
And you two, listen up, we're going to hear a story. One that begins with the return of your uncle. The bravest warrior." "The bravest," shouted little Eorn, running after the twins, thrilled. He was home. Everything felt familiar, and yet everything was different. From outside he stared at the high walls of Caer Thalen, pausing at every new stone placed during the reconstruction. The fire had devoured part of the main building, and the scars were still visible. The repairs bore the mark of his people's effort, and he hadn't been there to help. Even the MacDonalds, now allies through ancient and renewed blood ties, had lent their strength to rebuild what had been destroyed. Eorn could sense the changes in his home: thicker walls, reinforced structures, a sturdier facade, but also a different energy, a pulse he couldn't quite recognize. Life had moved on without him. And he could barely keep up. He didn't know what was harder, adjusting to a place that had changed without him, or accepting that he himself had changed too. In the years of absence, he had become a stranger even to himself. He covered his face with his hands, exhausted. The hawk Caelan soared above him, like a sign or a memory, a loyal shadow that had never left him. "Who are you hiding from?" The voice struck him like an echo from the past. When he looked up, he met the wise eyes of 18, his nursemaid, his mother in every way but name.
"From myself," he whispered, his voice tight with emotion.
18 looked at him the way she always had, without judgment, with the unconditional love of someone who had seen a child born, fall, and rise again. She, who knew him better than anyone, needed no questions. A glance was enough. "Why, Eorn?" she asked gently. "You are one of the finest souls I've ever had the privilege to watch grow. And don't interrupt me," she added, lifting a hand to stop any protest. "Your kindness doesn't belong to you alone, it belongs to those who love you, and it's been taken from them for far too long. You've come back, my child. So why are you still running?" He closed his eyes and let the words wrap around him like balm. 18, my 18, he murmured and offered her a smile that had been hidden far too long. "Did you cry for me too? I'm still waiting for that hug only a mother knows how to give when her son comes home." The old woman stepped forward without another word, and held him tightly to her chest. Eorn wrapped his arms around her with restrained tenderness, trembling inside at how fragile she had become. He thought of everything his uncle Thalen had told him about what had happened to 18 during the attack, her resistance, her pain. "You did your duty," he whispered in her ear, not letting go. "I know what happened. What you went through. If I had been here, 18, I swear by the old gods I wouldn't have left your side for a single moment." She stroked his face, just like she used to when he was a child. "You weren't here, that's true. But I never lacked your memory. When that monster tortured me, I thought you were gone forever, and that hurt more than any wound. But if anything helped me endure, it was the hope that maybe one day I'd see you again." "If Duran was still alive, I'd kill him," Eorn growled. With my own hands. Eira gently shook her head, holding his face between her wrinkled palms. Don't let him steal another day from you, Eira. Don't let his shadow stay with you. He's gone now.
But you're still here.
You can still take back what's yours, the life you left behind. Eira closed his eyes and rested his forehead against hers. Were you always this wise? Always. But as children, none of you listened. You only paid attention when I threatened to take away your pastries. He let out a quiet laugh. You mean those cream pastries? Exactly those. And in case you're wondering, there's a full tray of them in the hall. Caelan had them made when he heard you'd returned. But if you don't hurry, Connell will eat every last one. Just like he used to. You're luring me back with sweets like a child.
Does it work?
Always works. And with a true smile, Eira put an arm around Eira's shoulders and walked with her into the fortress. Caelan circled in the sky, as if he too were coming home. That night, when the hall had emptied and the fire dwindled in the great hearth, Eira remained alone with his cup. The place had changed. So had he. But not everything lost could be recovered with new stones or warm embraces. He rested his head against the wood of the chair, and his thoughts drifted inevitably to Arianwen. Not because he needed her as a refuge, 18 had reminded him he was still loved, but because he wanted her to know that kind of love too. She deserved more than a roof over her head, she deserved roots. And he wanted to be that place for her. Chapter 23. Glorndunnock, land of the Ocalia. Meanwhile in Glorndunnock, Arianwen was thinking of him too. Sitting before the mirror misted by candlelight, she held Caelaith's small empty vial between her fingers. She looked at it as if it were a piece of wreckage, a relic of a wish that had failed to keep its promise. It didn't work, Caela, she whispered, as if the old woman could hear her from the depths of the forest where she lived. The witch's voice seemed to answer from within her mind. If your heart refuses to open, no spell can force it. And it was true. She had followed every instruction. She waited for nightfall, for the darkest hour of the soul. After a cold dinner full of false toasts and borrowed promises, she had retreated to her chambers. She took the vial, and descended the stairs like someone walking to the gallows. When she reached Fiacre's door, she didn't hesitate. She drank it all, while he looked at her in surprise. When she kissed him, she had searched for the spark that would ignite her heart, but all she felt was ice. Fiacre's reaction had been clumsy, ravenous, manly in the worst possible way. And in that moment she understood, the potion hadn't failed. Her heart simply belonged to someone else. Now, curled up with Pearl, the cat Eira had given her, warm and silent like a living memory, Arianwen couldn't hold back her tears. I can't marry that man, she said, more to herself than to the animal. I can't pretend love can be forced when my soul has already chosen. Do you think if I speak to him he'll understand? The thought struck like a flash of light. A possibility. A path. She set Pearl down on the bed and left, ready to change her fate once more. She knocked firmly on Fiacre's door. He appeared with that fox-like smile that had never inspired trust. I can't do it, she said before he could speak. I can't marry you. I tried, but my heart doesn't belong to you. And it belongs to someone else. His voice, once smooth, turned cold.
Yes, she answered without lowering her gaze.
What followed was like an eclipse. He seized her arm roughly, his words turning dark and threatening. He spoke of disgrace, of appearances, of what her father would say, of duty. But Arianwen was no longer the meek girl of days past. She had felt the soul of a man who was free and good. And she would accept nothing less. She screamed. Called for help. And when the door opened, it was Ain who entered, small, trembling, but firm. She doesn't want to be here, her sister said, facing Macabre with a courage that came straight from her heart. Fiacre backed away, releasing her with disdain. He let them go. But his words rang out like a threat. No one will believe you. You will be mine. Whether you want it or not. In Aen's room, Arianwen was still shaking. Her sister held her, listened to her, and when the young woman asked her to take care of Pearl, she nodded with tears in her eyes. "I'll leave tonight," said Arianwen. "I can't live as a prisoner of an imposed fate. Maybe the spell didn't stir love in the heart, but it awakened my will. Sailor was right, love can't be forced. It can only be followed." The little girl didn't fully understand, but she looked at her with the devotion of someone who had found a lighthouse in the storm. Then the door opened again. Fianna appeared, stiff and hard as a river stone.
"What is she doing here?"
Her stepmother's words were cold, sharp. But Arianwen gave them no power. Not anymore.
"Don't worry, stepmother.
I was just leaving." She turned to Aen. Gave her a faint glowing smile. "Take care of her for me. I'll come back." And she walked out, determined to find her freedom, or to lose herself in it. Chapter 24. Caer Nah, the Invisible Wound. 3 days had passed since his return to Caer Nah, and Aeon still found no rest. The hours passed heavily, thick with reunions, words suspended in memory, gestures reaching for what had been lost. Though he walked the halls he once knew as his own, something in him remained adrift, as if his soul had yet to arrive at the same place as his body. The warmth of home and familiar faces brought comfort, but also a strange sense of detachment. His nieces and nephews, the bright-eyed girl and the little ones darting through the corridors like fawns, watched him with a mix of wonder and tenderness that left him defenseless. They laughed with him, clung to his legs, called him a hero. And though that should have filled him with pride, at times he felt as if he were only pretending, playing a role that no longer fit. Hero. Who could call themselves that after 4 years of running, of hiding their name like a shadow? That night he didn't go down to the hall. The noise hurt more than the silence. He needed to breathe alone, to be with that other Aeon who had learned to survive far from everything, in exile. He let himself collapse onto the bed, body exhausted but soul even more so. He closed his eyes. And then she returned. Her. Arianwen. Her gaze. Her words. The way the wind seemed to obey her presence. There wasn't a night he didn't think of her. The memory hurt, but he needed it. It wasn't a wound, it was the very pulse of his heart.
What if she had dared to ask me, he thought. What if she had asked me to take her with me, to defy her world for hours?
He would have taken her hand. He would have fled with her to some hidden corner in the north, sheltered by the forest, under the blessing of the old spirits. But he hadn't. Neither of them had. And now that silence was the only language they shared. A soft flutter at the window pulled him from his thoughts. Caelan. The hawk, faithful and silent, looked at him with eyes that neither judged nor forgot. Aeon rose, crossed the room, and opened the window. The bird entered, with the ease of one who knows well the soul of the man he serves. It perched beside him, wings brushing the thick air of the room. You came back, Aeon whispered, stroking its back slowly. No questions, no conditions. The hawk tilted its head, as if it understood. Aeon sat on the windowsill, letting the cold night clear his face. The highland sky was clear, strewn with stars. Overhead, the constellation of the Hind rose, a symbol of guidance and rebirth to the ancient folk. Do you think she's waiting for me? He asked the heir, or perhaps Caelan. Do you think her silence means the same as mine? There was no answer, but he didn't need one. Because even though the days at Caer Nah were filled with smiles and familiar voices, in Aeon's heart only one promise echoed, that there was still a path left to walk. One that would lead him back to her. And this time, he wouldn't hesitate. The message at dawn. Dawn had not yet broken when the pounding at the door shattered Aeon's restless sleep. He woke with his heart on alert, mind still tangled in shadows. Sitting up in bed, he rubbed his eyes and glanced toward the window. The night remained untouched, as if time itself had stopped. These were not hours for visitors. He rose barefoot and opened the door cautiously. A servant stood before him, nervous, holding out a letter. "Forgive me, my lord, a messenger came. He said it was urgent. That I was to give this to you alone, without delay." Aeon took the parchment with a murmured thanks and closed the door. He lit the candle on the candelabrum, and sat at the table. The paper crackled in his hands. The handwriting was rushed dry. No signature. "If you wish to see Lady Arianwen alive again, come to the tavern in Shonen by Loch Ornick, and ask for Dragon. Tell no one and come alone, or she dies." The world seemed to stop. Arianwen. Her name ignited something in his chest. As if the threat wasn't just against her, but against everything he had failed to protect. Her face rose in his memory with painful clarity, that clear gaze, the disarming smile, the fierce sweetness of someone who longed to be free without ceasing to love. No signature. No clues. Only the brutal urgency of fear. "Who wants to hurt you, Arianwen? And why drag me into it?" She was supposed to be marrying, yes. And as far as he knew, she was under the watch of her father, Laird O'Callagher, while the wretched pact with Macabre was being finalized. Everything should have been under control, at least on the surface. But Aeon's heart knew what his mind still resisted. Arianwen wasn't just another piece on the board of alliances. Someone wanted her out of the game. And maybe he himself was part of the price. He stood, agitated, and began pacing. A memory surged, the fallen sword of the bandit in the woods, that blade too fine for a common thief. Hadn't that attack been too precise? Ruahan had said it, the men seemed more interested in getting close to Arianwen than in robbing them. She had been the target. He hadn't wanted to see it. Or maybe he hadn't wanted to believe it. His steps halted. The candle flickered with a faint crackle. Silence pressed in. On the windowsill, Caelan watched him with the stillness of wise creatures. The hawk had made no sound on arrival. He was simply there, as if he knew. "You sensed it already, didn't you?" Aeon said softly. "That this isn't over. That I walked away too soon." The bird tilted its head, unmoving. A wordless guardian. Aeon looked at the letter again. He clenched it tightly, then finally threw it into the fire. The flames devoured it with a hiss. He couldn't ask for counsel. He couldn't waste time. Not even Connell could know. He would have stopped him from going alone. But this was Arianwen. And if something happened to her, he would never forgive himself. Minutes later, as the first blue hues of dawn began to slip between the mountains, a solitary figure rode down the paths of Caer and Eira, heading toward Loch Ornick. The cold bit at his face, but he didn't feel it. His mind repeated only one name. Arianwen. Behind him, gliding silently through the air, Caelan soared like a living shadow among the trees. Chapter 25. Shonen's Tavern. When Aeon arrived at the tavern in Shonen, the sun was sinking behind the hills of Loch Ornick, painting the horizon in a thick red, almost like blood. He pushed the thought away, but something in the air smelled of warning. He tied his horse among others beneath a bare oak, and scanned the surroundings before stepping inside. Every part of him was alert, body, ears, memory. The interior was warm, loud, thick with smoke and voices. The kind of place where danger often wore the mask of camaraderie. Scattered patrons sat at tables, mugs of ale raised, coarse laughter echoing, and an off-key musician strummed a lute in the corner. He approached the bar. The barkeep needed no introduction. His hair, eyebrows and lashes were milk-white, as if snow had claimed his body. Even his eyes, a pale, unreal grey, seemed from another world. "Excuse me," said Aeon, voice low. "I'm looking for someone named Dragon. I was told I'd find him here." The albino looked at him for a moment, without surprise. He gave a small nod. "In the back, by the window." Aeon turned on his heels. The corner was dark, and yet the man sitting there looked as though he'd been waiting forever. His eyes glowed like burning coals in the gloom. Aeon walked toward him, steady but unhurried. The moment their eyes met, he knew. Dragon? The same, the man replied, never looking away. You came alone. That speaks well of you. Though I don't trust it. You could have men posted behind the hill, waiting for a signal. Eorn narrowed his eyes. If I wanted you dead, I'd do it now. I don't need an army to finish someone who hides behind threats. Dragon let out a dry, guttural laugh. You should have killed me in the forest, but the lady stopped you. And look now, both of you are at my mercy. The weight of the words tightened Eorn's throat. Where is Arianwen? Or have you brought me here just to waste my time? Oh, she's close. Closer than you think. Dragon shrugged. You underestimate me, boy. But I'm craftier than I look. Follow me, and I'll prove it. And why should I believe you? Because you have no other choice. Dragon stood, his movements deliberate. The half-light cloaked him like a mantle. He leaned slightly toward Eorn. Before we go, hand over your sword. Time seemed to freeze. Eorn didn't look away. Every part of him called for a fight for blood. But deeper, quieter, the voice of Arianwen called him. He couldn't risk her. He unbuckled his belt, and handed over the weapon. Dragon took it with a slow, almost theatrical gesture. Good. Now come with me. I'll take you to her. Eorn moved forward. Hatred burned in his chest. Dragon walked ahead, confident, and he followed like a hound on a tight leash. If you've harmed her, he murmured, you'll pay with your soul. I'm not that cruel, Dragon replied with a crooked smile. She's only being held. For now. In that moment, something shifted in his face. A shadow passed over his features, as if a darker intent flickered beneath the mask. Eorn said nothing. He clenched his jaw, turned with fury, and headed for the door. That's when he collided with a man carrying 2 mugs. One of them spilled down the stranger's shirt. Watch it, the man growled, voice rough. Eorn barely paused. He glanced at the man, weathered face, a scar slashing from eye to jaw. His hard grey eyes followed him. Forgive me, Eorn muttered, and kept walking without looking back. He didn't see the surprise that flickered across the stranger's face, nor how the man turned to watch him leave, lips pressed tight. Outside, the red light had turned violet. The wind swept down from the lake with ancient force. High above, among the bare branches, Caelan waited, unmoving. As if he already knew what was coming. Chapter 26. The moon, shy and faded behind a veil of clouds, barely managed to brush the contours of the lone cabin deep in the woods. It was as if the entire sky had lowered its voice, so as not to interrupt what was about to unfold within. The wind whispered through the ancient trees, heavy with old secrets. Eorn dismounted, without a word. His boots sank into the silence as they touched the damp earth, and his gaze, shadowed with distrust, swept the surroundings as if trying to read in the folds of the land a warning his heart already sensed. Caelan, his hawk, circled wide in the sky before settling on a twisted ash branch. From there he watched. Like an ancestral spirit, like the part of Eorn that remained free, unbroken and fierce. No hidden enemies, only fate waiting for you behind that door, murmured Dragon with a smile. But Eorn didn't reply. The name Macdara wasn't everything. He had learned that honor doesn't lie in a surname, but in the echo of the choices one makes in the dark. When he pushed open the cabin door, a gust of ancient air enveloped him. Inside, the light of a few candles trembled as if they too feared to witness what was to come. The stone walls stood silent, unmoving witnesses to countless forgotten things. Beyond, a second door. And behind it, a tremor in his chest warned him he wasn't ready. He placed a hand on the wood, and for an instant he heard the sea of his childhood, his mother's prayers, his grandfather's voice speaking of the ancients, of those who knew how to read the soul's language. Then he pushed. The air grew heavier as he entered. And there she was. Arianwen. Curled beside the wall, chained like a wounded vision. Her hair, like dusted gold, fell over her shoulders, dulled by shadow. Her eyes, the ones that had once set his aflame, searched for him in the darkness and found him. And Eorn felt himself break inside, the way a dry branch snaps under the first weight of winter. Arianwen. It was barely a whisper, but it carried everything he could not say. He stepped forward, but a sharp blade stopped him. "Don't come any closer," growled a male voice beside her. Fiacre Macaba's face emerged like an embodied shadow. His sword grazed Arianwen's neck with a cruel caress. "You're betrothed?" Aeon asked, disbelief and contempt in his voice. Nothing made sense. And yet, all the pain fit. Arianwen's gaze, empty and distant, held his. And that was what shattered him. Not the chains. Not the threat. Her silence. Her trembling. Her wounded beauty, still unyielding. Caelan cried from outside, a shriek that was not a bird's but an ancestor's, an untamed spirit's call. Aeon trembled. "What have they done to you?" he whispered. Blood appeared like a tragic flower beneath Arianwen's neck. And with it, the limit. "Enough. Don't touch her," he roared, and the sound of his voice cracked the air like lightning. But his fury had no wings. They knew it. Macaba smiled with the confidence of one who had buried the truth beneath a mountain of lies. The chains waited. If Aeon wanted to stay close to Arianwen, he would have to surrender every defense, every trace of pride. Everything. And he did. Because love isn't the privilege of the strong, but the choice of those who refuse to turn to stone. He let them bind him. The chains bit into his wrists, but that wasn't what broke him. It was knowing he couldn't touch her. That there she was, only steps away, the woman who had given him back his soul, and he couldn't reach her. The silence between them was an ocean. And the tears that didn't fall weighed more than steel. Dragon, his task fulfilled, chaining them and delivering them to his lord, withdrew in silence, leaving behind an air thick with threat and abandonment. Aeon's eyes, the color of a sky before a storm, locked onto Fiacre's with an intensity that chilled the blood. "If Conall killed William Mac Tuathal," he said, voice low and steady like an ancient vow, "it was because justice no longer lived among men." Fiacre pressed his lips into a bitter line. "And you? What do you deserve, Aeon of the Woods?" he spat. "When Dragon ambushed you, I was meant to be the hero. I was supposed to rescue her, save her, and you ruined everything." "You could never save anyone," Aeon replied with a desolate calm. "You don't know love. Only the hunger for your own reflection." Fiacre turned toward Arianwen, as if he could still find justification for his failure in her. His shadow fell over her like a black cloud covering a hilltop. "Everything would have been different if you hadn't chosen this savage," he muttered thickly. "But you'll pay for humiliating me." "You don't love Fiacre," Arianwen answered, her voice as soft as the breeze before dawn. "And what isn't born of love can never claim my soul." Then the tension in the room became unbearable. The very air seemed to hold the world's breath. Fiacre turned to Arianwen with a wild look in his eyes, and began to tug at her dress with trembling hands, as if possessing her could erase the contempt she had returned. The gesture, brutal in its urgency, left no doubt. He meant to break her spirit where he had failed to win her heart. Fiacre stepped closer. Chained to the damp stone, Aeon felt the blood of his ancestors stir in his veins. It wasn't just rage that surged through him now, it was the sacred certainty that he had to protect her. Her. The spirit of fire and water. The only root that anchored him to this wandering earth. He pulled with everything he had against the chains that held him. His arm burned, his back cracked, but pain had no place in his mind, only the image of Arianwen. And from above, Caelan cried out, a scream from the invisible twilight, as though his wings were the soul of Aeon made flesh. Then the iron gave way. The wall, witness to so many shadows, broke under the force of a love that would not yield. Fiacre turned, stunned. "What in the—" But there was no answer. Only the dull final crack of the chain crashing down like lightning onto his skull. And silence. Arianwen didn't scream. She simply lowered her gaze to the fallen body. The blood spread slowly across the ancient stones, like a sorrow held back for centuries. The world seemed to stop, suspended in that red, silent vision. "Arianwen, are you all right? Aeon asked, his voice dissolving into the mist of the moment. She didn't answer right away. She couldn't. Her eyes remained fixed on Fiacre, not out of fear, but because of something older, deeper, the realization that evil doesn't always wear the face of a monster. Sometimes it wears a human one, yet still has no soul. Arianwen, he said again, his urgency a whispered prayer. She finally looked up. She saw him there reaching toward her, his arm outstretched, exhausted but alive. Her protector, her promise. Aeon. And in that instant, reality melted like mist beneath the sun. He was with her. I'll get you out of here, he said. No one will ever hurt you again. Not ever. His words were an invisible bridge, woven from threads of truth. He struggled against the chain still binding him to the wall, but couldn't free himself. Don't worry, he added with a soft smile heavy with exhaustion. I'll find a way. Arianwen nodded. She needed nothing more. Her gaze, locked with his, was all that still stood firm in a wounded world. And high above, etched against the grey Scottish sky, Caelan circled. Guardian. Witness. Spirit. Night fell slowly, and the Celtic world, the one that whispered in trees and sang through rivers, seemed to bow reverent before the unseen power of true love. Arianwen watched the blood spread like a dark stain across the earth. It flowed slowly from Fiacre's motionless head, tracing uneven circles that seemed to breathe. The world around her felt distant, muffled, as if time itself had paused to observe that impossible scene beside her. Her dress torn and stained soaked slowly, but she didn't notice. She could only stare. She had never seen death so closely. Even less, a man collapsed before her like a broken puppet. And yet the sight stirred no pity in her, only a nameless disquiet, as if her soul were trying to understand something deeper than death, liberation. Dragon, having fulfilled his task of chaining and delivering them, had left in silence, leaving them alone. Now only shadows remained, the echo of danger and Aeon. Arianwen, can you hear me? Are you all right? His voice reached her like something from a distant dream, soft and dim. Arianwen's eyes rose as if pulled by an invisible force, and found Aeon's. He was stretching a hand toward her from the ground, still bound to the stone, a quiet urgency in his gaze. They couldn't touch, but something far deeper already connected them. A tremor crossed her chest when she saw him. She had dreamed of his return, had called for him with her soul, with every thought since the moment she was taken from her home. And now he was here, wounded and chained, but here. His gaze was a refuge and his voice a promise. No one will ever hurt you again, he murmured, his voice breaking with tenderness and fury. I swear it on my life. I'll get you out of here. She didn't answer with words. She only nodded, her eyes veiled with unshed tears and exhaustion. Somewhere deep in her mind, fear still throbbed, the violent gestures, the silent threat that had been Fiacre Macabre. His hands hadn't merely wanted to strip her of clothing, but of dignity. But he had failed. She was still standing. I should have run away with you to Tir Na Nog when you asked me to, Arianwen whispered, her voice splintered by regret. And I should have carried you off that night, without looking back. But I was a fool. I clung to honor, when I should have listened to my heart. Forgive me. She swallowed hard. Her lips trembled, but her eyes no longer belonged to a victim. Aeon, can you reach it? She asked, then pointing at Fiacre's sword. He hesitated. The body on the floor was like a chasm opening in the ground. But when he saw Arianwen's face steady despite the tremor, he breathed deeply. This time fear would not decide for him. The key, he murmured. He hid it in the lining of his coat, just after chaining me. It has to be there. Then you'll be the one to free us, she said, a faint spark in her voice as she tossed him the sword. With clumsy movements, still limited by the shackles, Arianwen approached the body. She used the blade like a hook to drag it toward her, avoiding its gaze. Blood stained her dress, the air thick and heavy like a broken dream. Aeon watched in silence, his heart tight. Every movement she made was a reminder of his delay, his helplessness, the violence he hadn't been able to prevent. Don't look at him. Just find the key, he said gently. When she had the body close enough, her fingers searched the inner pocket. And there, between stiffened fabric, she found the cold metal of the key. She lifted it with a trembling motion, as if that small object could unlock more than chains, perhaps the path back to life itself. I have it. Good, my brave one, Aeon whispered. Hurry. They'll notice his absence soon. Arianwen fit the key into the shackle. The click of metal giving way sounded like a thunderclap of hope within their prison. The smile that spread across her face was so pure it made Aeon's chest ache. That woman deserved to smile for love, for freedom, for joy, not just for escaping chains. As she freed her other hand and crossed the room toward him, Aeon felt a certainty burn in his core. He would kill Fiacra 1,000 times over if it meant bringing that light back to her face. I came to rescue you, and it's you who rescues me, he whispered, nearly breathless. Arianwen, with infinite tenderness, removed his chains and placed her hand on his cheek. The touch was as soft as the brush of a petal, but Aeon felt as if he could breathe again. All that matters is that you came. When I saw you enter, I thought it was a dream. Because I've dreamed of you, Aeon. I've longed for you. I let you leave, without telling you that my soul was breaking. And since then, not a single day has passed without your name in my thoughts. Arianwen. Aeon cupped her face in his hands, his voice thick with emotion. I carried you with me too. Every step of the journey, every forest, every song in the wind, all spoke to me of you. I didn't know when I left that your place was with me. How could I not see it? She didn't answer. She only cried in silence. Kiss me, she whispered then. You always stopped for honor for him.
But for me, there was never anyone else.
Only you. Aeon leaned in and sealed her lips with his. The kiss was tender, like a caress that heals a wound, like a prayer written into skin. It was nothing like what she had lived before. There was no imposition, no violence. Only surrender, gentleness, and a love held in too long. Arianwen trembled. Her body would remember that sweetness forever. Though Fiacra had left a shadow, her soul's first kiss was this one, the kiss Aeon gave her as if he cherished every part of her being. And Caelan, perched high on a beam, watched in silence, winged witness to that sacred moment. It was as if the spirit of the land embraced them, reminding them that even among the ruins of pain, light and love could still be born again. Chapter 27. They left the cabin shortly after, in silence. Arianwen walked a step behind Aeon, her hand entwined with his like a silent prayer. The air was cold, damp, and the forest slumbered beneath the mist like an old sage. The soft crunch of leaves beneath their feet was the only sound breaking the stillness. Fiacra wasn't alone, Arianwen murmured, barely audible, as if afraid of waking something more than the night. I know, he replied without looking at her. Dragon warned me. Did you see how many there were? No. I wasn't looking. I was. It's all right, Aeon said, stopping to gently squeeze her hand.
Just keep walking. But their steps didn't go far.
A harsh, powerful voice rose behind them like thunder tearing through the calm. You've miscalculated, Macdara. Aeon turned, tensing the arm that held the sword he had just taken from a man who would breathe no more. 7 men emerged from the trees, like shadows summoned by rage. The one who spoke had the body of a giant, a soot-dark beard and sullen eyes. He wore the colors of the Macabre. Where's our lead? Inside, Aeon replied curtly. Arianwen trembled at his side. It wasn't just fear, it was the weight of too many hours spent fighting to stay whole. Aeon wished he could shield her from the entire world, but he knew he couldn't be both sword and sanctuary. One of the soldiers entered the cabin. The rest surrounded the pair, forming a circle of steel and hostility. When the shout came from inside, hoarse, horrified, final, they all knew what the verdict would be. He killed him, the soldier roared as he emerged. He killed our lad. Aeon felt fate close in around them like an ancient trap. Arianwen clung to his arm. He couldn't leave her behind, but neither could he defend her alone against 7 blades. Still he tried. He pushed her gently to the side and turned to face the attack. And then the cry of a sword sliced through the night like lightning. If you needed help, Macdara, all you had to do was ask. A warrior stepped out from the shadows, parrying the killing blow with lethal precision. Another, behind him, had already caught Arianne Wen with care, and now shielded her with his body. Eowyn recognized the scar on his face, the man he had bumped into at the inn, as if fate had already woven their threads together. There was no time for questions. The fight erupted with the fury of a storm. But this time, Eowyn was not alone. Back to back with that stranger, every strike was more than defense, it was an act of faith. When it was over, the ground was strewn with bodies. Only one Macabre remained standing, trembling. Let him go, Eowyn ordered, stopping his new ally with a gesture. The man fled into the forest without looking back. Arianne Wen was alive. That was all that mattered. Are you all right? He whispered, holding her in his arms. She nodded, her eyes wet, and in that moment Eowyn knew something inside him had changed forever. It wasn't just the battle, or even the blood. It was the sense of having found an anchor in the midst of the wreckage. The warrior's voice broke the silence. I don't understand what I've seen, and I won't judge, but this doesn't add up. And who the hell are you? Eowyn asked, his brow furrowed. Don't you recognize me? The other man, the one with the scar, spoke then. I told you he looked like Connell, but he's not. Rúine. Eowyn whispered, recognizing the name before the face. And he's Diarmid MacDonald, said Rúine, pointing to the man who had just saved him. Led. My brother in arms. And now it seems a friend of your clan too. A thick silence followed. Eowyn turned slightly, feeling how the past, that past he had tried to tear from his skin like a second shadow, was returning in new forms. He was no longer a man, alone. He could no longer pretend he carried no name, no story. But in the midst of it all, he looked up. And there was Caelan, his hawk, perched on the highest branch, wings folded and eyes lit with ancient wisdom. He was his reflection. His free soul. His bond with the unseen. Arianne Wen looked at him with tenderness, and Eowyn for the first time met her gaze with no armor. The forest wrapped them in its old breath. And beneath that overcast sky, among the trees, the story continued. Joy was not a place one reached by walking smooth roads. It was a fleeting spark, a breath drawn in the heart of the storm. Arianne Wen understood that now, as the crackle of the fire Rúine had lit cast dancing shadows across the faces of those around her. The forest clearing where they had stopped felt like an ancient sanctuary, where trees whispered in Gaelic and the sky, veiled by leaves, seemed to hold its breath. She remembered her childhood dreams, when she lived with her Aunt Bridget and believed happiness was a fruit within reach. Back then, all it took was closing her eyes and stretching her soul. Not even knowing she was stepping from one glass cage into another, more gilded one, had managed to stop her heart's momentum. She didn't believe in fates carved in stone by unseen hands. If her destiny was written, she would erase it with her own footprints. She had never wanted to be a bird with broken wings. She wanted to fly. Toward the sun, toward mystery, toward him. It had been magic that guided her at first. The magic of songs, of herbs, of omens. But then she discovered a greater one. The magic that beat in her chest when she loved, when she fought, when she refused to obey. That was when she grew stronger. Wilder. More alive. And for daring to live, they had nearly destroyed her. She closed her eyes so she wouldn't see Fiachra Macabre's face, to erase his voice from her memory. When she opened them again, she looked for Eowyn. He was speaking with Diarmid, and the calm way his hands moved, the rhythm of his voice, were like a silent prayer that wrapped around her and brought her peace. She would have given anything to be alone with him in that sacred moment when the world seems to hold still. To ask him if what they had shared was real, if he too had felt that kiss as an ancient vow born from the soul. She felt detached from all she had been, like a tree uprooted. And yet before Eowyn she sensed new roots growing beneath her skin. The men's voices reached her ears as if from another world. She heard her father's name, and suddenly realized they were all speaking of her future. Of her. Of her life. As if it didn't belong to her.
We have to take her back to Glorndunnock, said Diarmid. What for?
Aeon's voice was harsher.
Her father didn't protect her.
He allowed her to be given to a man who? Arianwen didn't want to hear more. She didn't want them speaking of her as something to be returned, as if her will meant nothing. That thought cut deeper than the wound of her captivity. Because now she knew what it was to feel alive. She knew what it was to look at someone and recognize herself. And she wasn't about to lose that.
I don't want to go back, she said.
She didn't think it. She simply felt it. The silence that followed was thick, like mist sliding through the branches. Runia, Diarmid, all of them looked at her. But the only eyes that mattered were Aeon's. And in them she found certainty.
We'll take her to Caer and Eira, he said.
Diarmid raised his hands in exasperation. Runia muttered something about offenses and broken alliances. Arianwen no longer listened. Her soul was bound to Aeon's. They won't be able to ask for her back, he continued. Because by then she'll be my wife. And the world seemed to stop. A gust of wind stirred the branches, as if the ancient spirits of the forest had awakened. Caelan, Aeon's hawk, circled above the clearing in a perfect arc, leaving a cry in the air that brushed the eternal. It was as if Aeon's untamed soul had blessed them from the sky. Arianwen looked at him, and nothing more needed to be said.
Yes, she whispered. Yes, I will.
Her heart pounded, but it wasn't fear. It was destiny. Not the one others had written for her, but the one she was choosing herself, with her soul, her voice, her love. A war could break out. The clans could rise. But in that moment, there was only the beauty of the irrevocable. Chapter 28. The echo of the forest and the sea. They rode through shadows and mist, as if the night itself cloaked them to keep fate from noticing their passage. Aeon had barely slept since their flight, driven not by a fever of the body but of the soul, an ancient, visceral urgency to protect what was most precious to him. He didn't speak. He didn't reason. He just pressed on. Arianwen clung to his back, as if her own sanity depended on that contact. Caelan the hawk flew high above, invisible in the blackness, but Aeon felt his presence like a reflection of his spirit, alert, wounded, resolute. When he veered off the path leading to Caer and Eira, his companions exchanged uneasy glances.
But they didn't object.
There was something in Aeon's eyes, a silent abyss of determination that disarmed them. They arrived at a small stone church, sleeping beneath moss and wind. Aeon dismounted, and helped Arianwen down. She looked at him, searching his face for an answer. I need to seal something, he said quietly.
Not with the world.
Just with you. Inside, the air smelled of old wax and pine. The pews cast long shadows like sleeping presences. Aeon walked toward the altar, holding Arianwen's hand. She stopped. Are you sure? He turned and gently lifted her face in his hands. There was a trembling tenderness in his gesture, a silent plea. I won't leave you behind again, he whispered. If you say no, we'll get back on the horse and ride away. But if you say yes, tonight we'll seal what's already true, that your soul is bound to mine. She nodded, and with that small motion brought an eternal moment into the world. The priest, awakened and half asleep, arrived led by Runia. He observed the pair, the intensity in their eyes, and asked no more than was needed. A binding, he asked. Aeon hesitated. He looked at the mantle crossed over his chest, bearing his clan's colors. He cut it with the dagger Diarmid handed him, and offered it. That cloth, stripped of its former meaning, would now bind his fate to Arianwen's. They took each other's hands. The priest wrapped their wrists with the cloth, tying a simple eternal knot. You may speak your vows, he announced, his voice steadier now. Arianwen spoke first. Her words didn't come from memory, but from the heart beating at her lips. I, Arianwen o Calia, by the life that runs in my veins and the love I carry, take you, Aeon Macdara, as my chosen. There is no shame or guilt in this love, for it is pure like the river born among the mountains. I vow to love you without reserve, in light and in shadow, in this life and the next, where we shall meet again and remember. I honor you. I see you. I love you. Eorn didn't speak right away. Emotion closed his throat like the chill of mist.
At last he looked up at her.
I have no words to match yours. I only know I found you when I no longer believed in coming back. And since then every day without you has felt like being lost. I vow to protect you, Arianwen. And to make your laughter my purpose. I swear for as long as I live, no one will ever hurt you again. The priest added no embellishment. It was a night without witnesses or ornament, but no less sacred for it. By the God who dwells in all living things, by the light and the darkness that shape the soul, I declare you husband and wife. Eorn's lips brushed Arianwen's like a prayer, a sacred acknowledgement. When she kissed him back, stronger with the hunger of present and promise, the world seemed to pause for a breath with them. Caelan flew over the church with a sharp cry, as if celebrating their union from the open sky. They left the chapel unhurried. The wind had calmed. The moon still veiled, let its light through like a blessing. They mounted again, more bound to each other than before. More at peace. Do you realize? Runia murmured into Diarmad's ear. He didn't say he loves her. Diarmad looked at him. Then he looked at Eorn, his upright back, his hand still entwined with Arianwen's.
No. But he said he came back for her.
And that without her he was lost. Sometimes that's more than love. It's belonging. The hawk circled above their heads before flying north. And together, they followed. Chapter 29. Tir na Nog awaits us. Their wedding night was not a noisy celebration, nor a feast filled with laughter. It was a slow journey beneath the stars, a whisper among trees, an intimate prayer spoken on the edge of a new beginning. They rode along narrow paths, wrapped in a silence that was not uncomfortable but sacred. Arianwen clung to Eorn's back, her face buried in his coat, as if she wanted to merge into his warmth, into his presence. The air was cold, and yet she didn't shiver. Something deeper than the body kept her awake, the quiet trembling of a soul standing before the unknown. Once sleep overtook her, and she slumped sideways in the saddle. Eorn reacted without thought, catching her firmly as he pulled on the reins. Forgive me. I think I fell asleep, she whispered, her voice almost childlike.
No, forgive me.
You've been through too much today. You need to rest, Arianwen. Diarmad, riding a few steps behind, spoke up with care. There's an inn not far from here. If we turn south, we can spend the night there. It'll be better for everyone, especially for her. Eorn nodded silently and dismounted. He completed the rest of the ride with Arianwen in his lap, wrapped in his cloak, her body gathered close to his like a prayer whispered to keep from falling apart. They didn't speak. The beat of their hearts, the rhythm of the horse, the murmur of wind through the branches was enough. Caelan flew overhead in wide circles, and now and then swooped low enough for Eorn to feel him near, as if his soul were reminding him he was still free, though now bound to something deeper than duty, love. The inn was simple, but warm. A couple of rooms, bread and cheese, red wine. The innkeeper welcomed them with a kindness that didn't seem bothered by the hour. Upon learning they were newlyweds, she blessed their union with simple, heartfelt words. You're the kind of couple one remembers. May you have a peaceful night and a long life, she said before disappearing upstairs with a jug of wine. Eorn carried Arianwen to the room in his arms. He did it naturally, without pretense, as if in holding her he was also shielding the part of himself that still doubted he deserved any of it. She nestled against his chest without a word. The room was small, with exposed wooden beams and a narrow bed covered by a thick blanket. A single candle cast soft shadows on the walls. There was no luxury or ornament, only an ancient, almost ancestral peace. Eorn laid Arianwen gently on the bed and stepped back.
But she didn't let go.
I just wanted to be alone with you, she said softly, as if the confession needed warmth. Eon looked at her, surprised by the tenderness that flooded him. That face, it was everything he had lost and everything he had found. He thought of the paths behind them, of his orphanhood, of Ireland left behind like a dream of stone and salt. He thought of her. And he knew, without doubt, that he could never go back to who he had been. "You are my home," he murmured, and didn't even know he was going to say it until the words were born. Arianwen smiled, her eyes wet, and rested her forehead against his. They stayed like that for a long time. There was no rush. Their union held no urgency, only depth. He held her, and the world narrowed to the rhythm of their breathing. The weight of the day gave way to a glowing calm, as if the night itself wished to bless the moment. They didn't make love out of need, but as an act of communion. They undressed slowly, without words, like one peeling away the petals of something sacred. Every touch was a promise, every glance a song the old bards would have wished to remember. When they finally joined, it was like returning to the beginning. Eon closed his eyes and saw the cliffs of Ireland, the hawk flying over the fields, his mother's laughter in a memory so old it no longer hurt. And then it all vanished because there was only Arianwen, with her soul open, her eyes fixed on him as if her love could heal every wound. Pleasure came without force, like a tide rising beneath the moon. And when Arianwen trembled in his arms, Eon felt something inside him redeemed forever. He was no longer just a warrior, or a child of war. He was a man who was loved. They remained wrapped around each other for a long time, steeped in the scent of wine, untouched in each other's warmth, in the music of a night that felt outside of time. Outside, Caelan perched on the windowsill and looked out at the horizon. Eon's free soul was still there watching. And inside that humble room, love had become flesh, but also spirit. Chapter 30. Children of the Dawn. The air was cold that morning, as if the clouds themselves knew that something ancient was about to awaken. The branches of the pines swayed gently on the edge of Glorndunnock, and in the frost-covered fields, the horse's breath rose like incense toward a sky just beginning to lighten. Eon stood in silence, apart from the men gathered in the stone hall, while the elders of the clans deliberated. The echo of their voices reached him as if from afar, filtered through something deeper, a sense of distance and dislocation that had followed him since setting foot on that land again. He was no longer the same man. No longer the reckless boy who had left with a sword at his side, and an inherited dream in his eyes. Nor the broken ghost, who had taken refuge in the silence of the northern woods. He was something else now. Something new he had no name for. At his side, Thalen MacDara, aged and worn by the years, tutor to Connell's son and symbolic head of the clan, watched him with the knowing gaze of one who sees beyond appearances. When he spoke, his voice was slow, weighted with gravity. "My time has passed," he said, rising with difficulty. "I no longer have the strength to lead, nor the youth to command respect. I will not be the one to guide the MacDara through uncertain times. And the boy, he is still only that, a boy." He turned then to Eon. "This clan needs more than a name. It needs a living flame. Someone who has fallen, and risen again with a clean brow. Eon, if the truth of your people still burns in your chest, accept the mantle. Not for yourself, but for all that you love and long to protect." For a moment silence reigned. All eyes turned to him, but Eon didn't answer right away. His gaze wandered through the open window, beyond the hall, where a hawk traced circles above the distant hills. Caelan. Like an omen. Like the voice of that which is never spoken but always known. Eon felt the weight of wandering years in his bones, the wounds time had not healed, the memory of lost faces. He felt, too, the trembling warmth of the moment Arianwen had offered him her hand in the dark, the only one who had not looked at him with fear or judgment. She was now his clearest truth. His compass. His home. He did not accept out of ambition or duty, but out of love. Because he wanted to protect that fragile thread of life they were beginning together. That sacred weave that had grown between them in the midst of their vulnerability. Because Arianwen needed roots, and he could offer them. Because she had given him back the name he had almost forgotten. He drew in a deep breath. The scent of dried heather and peat smoke reminded him of who he was. "I will accept," he said at last, his voice steady and clear.
"Not for glory nor for power, but because I must.
Because if I don't rise now, what meaning would my return hold? But we must await the king's decision." Caelan inclined his head, and with that gesture marked the passing of an age. Then Caelan swooped low, gliding over the castle roof. A murmur ran through the hall like a subtle current. Some called it a sign. Others coincidence. But Eorn knew what it meant. The soul does not always surrender to chains. His still wounded, still free would keep watch from the sky. And though uncertainty still pulsed in the unspoken words, something deep settled that morning among the clans, a silent pact. A hope. A truce woven not with swords, but with the invisible weight of faith and love. Chapter 31.
What do you think Tuiran O'Calia will say when she finds out you married her daughter in secret?
Macdara snapped, standing by the window with his arms crossed and a deep frown on his brow. And Theocra Macabre? Have you even considered what he might do, when he learns you've stolen his betrothed? Eorn stood his ground in the center of the room, his clothes still dusty from travel, not having allowed himself a moment's rest since his return. His gaze was locked on his older brothers, the one man whose approval still hurt to lack.
"It wasn't theft," he replied, his voice calm but tight with restrained tension. "It was a choice.
Hers and mine. Two clans, Eorn." Macdara raised his voice, slamming a hand against the armrest of the nearby chair. "Two powerful clans bound by fragile alliances. You can't act like a wanderer chasing the pull of his blood. You wear the mantle of the Macdara."
"I'm not asking you to understand.
But I am asking you to trust me."
"Trust," he let out a bitter laugh.
"After vanishing for weeks without a word, only to return with a wife carrying the dishonor of an elopement, and the fury of two patriarchs. And you expect us to trust you?" "I couldn't do anything else," Eorn said, stepping forward. "She was being handed to a fate she didn't choose. I just followed what my heart commanded." "Your heart doesn't rule this stronghold, Eorn," Macdara roared. "The Macdara cannot afford another war. Or have you forgotten what happened 4 winters ago, when the house nearly fell? I won't watch children hide beneath tables while fire devours our walls again." His voice broke, and for a moment Eorn saw past the severity, to the young man who had been forced to lead too early, to the brother who raised him from the ashes. "Do you think I would endanger this family?" Eorn asked, almost in a whisper. Macdara looked at him, his eyes heavy with worry and weariness. "You already have. Whether you meant to or not. And we've yet to see the cost." A thick silence settled between them, broken only by the crackling of the hearth. "It's not Arianwen's fault," Eorn added quietly. "Don't see her as a traitor. She was only seeking freedom." "And you?" Macdara asked sharply.
"What were you seeking?"
"Peace," Eorn confessed.
"And I found love."
"I won't trade it for any alliance. Not even yours." Macdara lowered his gaze, as if the words had cut deeper than he expected. "Seems it's going to take more than we thought to reclaim what we've lost," Eorn murmured, sorrow honest in his eyes before turning and walking down the same corridor Arianwen had disappeared through moments earlier. Macdara didn't stop him. He remained by the window, jaw clenched, bearing the weight of the clan alone on his shoulders. The night before the trial. The fire crackled softly in the corner of the room, as the weight of exhaustion settled on Eorn's shoulders. It had been a long day, full of unspoken tensions, sidelong glances in the corridors of Caer and Eira, and silences more eloquent than words. Outside, the wind swept across the frozen slopes with the murmur of an old lament. Arianwen stepped out of the bath chamber, wearing a lilac dress borrowed from Rhiannon. The skirt swayed as she turned, and her hair, gently waved by the warmth of the fire, was gathered in a simple braid at the nape of her neck. Eorn, lacing his boots by the hearth-bench, looked up and froze. She stopped in front of him, with a hint of shyness.
Does it look all right on me?
Aeon stood, his eyes never leaving her. In that moment, despite the fatigue, despite the fear, she seemed like light made flesh. "You're radiant, Mograd," he said softly, using the old tongue. He stepped closer and took her hands. "My family will love you, even if they don't yet know how much they should." Arianwen tried to smile, but her green eyes betrayed her unease. Her fingers trembled slightly in his. "They don't know everything, Aeon. They don't know what happened with Fiacre. And if they find out, if they think it was my fault." "It wasn't," he whispered firmly, placing a finger on her lips. "Don't ever say that again. It's not your fault. Makaba had a soul rotted from within." She looked at him with gratitude and sorrow. She embraced him, burying herself in his chest as if it were the only shelter she had left. Aeon held her that way in silence, until he felt her breath fall in rhythm with his. "I don't have the strength tonight," he murmured after a while, pulling back just enough to meet her gaze. "I know," Arianwen replied, brushing his cheek with her fingertips. "We don't need anything more than this." They lay down together on the bed, without hurry or shame, like two trees leaning into one another to withstand the wind. Aeon fell asleep with his head resting in Arianwen's lap, overcome by a weariness even worry couldn't outlast. She didn't wake him. She ran her fingers gently through his hair in silence, until the shadows stretched long on the stone walls and the first rays of dawn began to tint the sky gray. The next morning, between doubt and truth, tension was an invisible thread, woven through every corner of the great hall. Aeon descended the stone staircase, still not fully dressed, his gaze clouded by the haze of interrupted sleep. Arianwen walked behind him, her expression resolute, barely concealing the anxiety beneath. When they entered, the family was already gathered around the council table. Thalen Macdara stood, fixing them with a stern look. Conall leaned against a window ledge, arms crossed. Rhiannon and Diarmid sat in silence. Only the crackling of the fire, and the scrape of a chair broke the stillness. "It's about time," Conall said in a deep voice. "We need to talk." Aeon didn't answer immediately. He stepped forward and took Arianwen's hand, a gesture that left no room for doubt. "Is Fiacre Makaba dead?" Conall asked bluntly. The question struck the room like an axe. "He is," Aeon finally said. "I killed him." A dull murmur rippled through the hall. Thalen narrowed his eyes.
"How did it happen?"
"He was trying to force himself on her. In a cabin, in the northern mountains. He had kidnapped her. Chained her like an animal. I went to find her only because I received a letter, and I found him just as he was about to." Arianwen lowered her gaze, trying to still the tremble in her jaw. Aeon squeezed her hand. "The letter," Diarmid cut in. "Do you have it?" "No. I burned it. I didn't want anyone else to read it. It was a trap. I realized it too late." Conall straightened. "Then there's no proof?" "Just your word. Do you understand what that means, Aeon? A laird is dead. No witnesses. And now Calai's daughter arrives, married to you, with a story no one can confirm." Arianwen stepped forward. "I don't need anyone to confirm what I lived, sir. Fiacre Makaba was not an honorable man. My father was giving me to a monster. I refused. And for that, he locked me away and threatened me. And still, before the king, it will be your word against the Makaba clans," Thalen murmured thoughtfully. "He may understand.
But it won't be easy."
"It won't," Conall agreed. "Because if it wasn't Dragon Mactuathal who killed him, as some rumors claim, it was you. And then? If it wasn't Dragon Mactuathal?" Aeon looked at him sharply.
"What have you heard?"
Conall exchanged a glance with Thalen before replying. "Some say Fiacre was last seen with a group of men. That Dragon Mactuathal distanced himself from him. Others say the body was never found. Not officially. Only rumors. All that's known is that he hasn't returned to his clan." "Are you suggesting he's still alive?" I'm saying we should be ready. Because if he is, he'll come back with more fury than ever. And if he's not, someone will tell the story for him. And that story might not favor us. Silence followed, thick like a bad omen. Arianwen lowered her gaze, and Aeon felt the weight of it all crash down on his shoulders once more. Uncertainty was worse than any battle. Whatever the case, Thalen said at last, we'll write to Tuiran O'Calia. And we'll prepare for what's to come. But Aeon, he looked at him seriously, this time you won't make decisions alone. We're a family. And now she is part of us too. Arianwen lifted her gaze to him. For the first time in many days, she felt she belonged. And Aeon, weary to the bone, nodded. He knew this wasn't the end of the storm. It was only the beginning.